And the gospel is taken from the Gospel of Mark. And after 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John and led them up a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his clothes became radiant, intensely white, as no one on earth could bleach them. And there appeared to them Elijah with Moses, and they were talking with Jesus. And Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it is good that we are here. Let us make 3 tents, one for you, and one for Moses, and one for Elijah." For he did not know what to say, for they were terrified. And a cloud overshadowed them, and a voice came out of the cloud, "This is my beloved Son, listen to him." And suddenly, looking around, they no longer saw anyone with them but Jesus only. And as they were coming down the mountain, he charged them to tell no one what they had seen until the Son of Man had risen from the dead. This is the gospel of the Lord. So hopefully we can now see each other. Do give me a thumbs down at any point if you have a problem with any technical aspect. Just a short reflection today on those readings, because they have some troubling and challenging aspects to them, and they deserve really close attention. But I'm only going to touch on them. And I'm going to also allude to something Jill preached on last week, the woman caught in adultery. And I'm going to leave you with questions, I suspect, rather than with answers. There are some verses, some words that follow the reading that Brian read, which captures the paradox of our existence. And that is the reference to the treasures in the jars of clay. And this is especially poignant for me these days, because at the burial of the dead, as I stand by the grave, I drop earth into the grave, onto the casket, and I pray the prayer that has those moving words, earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Because our bodies are those jars of clay. Bits break off, bits wear out. And one day we know those jars will be irreparably damaged. And what then of the treasure that they contain? Because we are, most of us I think would conclude, we are more than the jars of clay. And this conviction is central for anyone with faith. It is central for me as I conduct funerals. I could not provide any comfort or any assurance if I didn't believe that this was not the end, that there was a treasure within the jar. Being a believer is about faith, faith being the assurance of things hoped for. It's complex. It has many aspects. It's not a final, settled matter. It is at least as complex as human existence is. And I believe we can't ignore, as believers, we can't ignore this complexity. And there is a paradox in the sharing of the gospel. As Paul's letter suggests, sharing of the gospel of Christ both attracts and repels people. It is both comforting and troubling. Consider the account from last week that Jill talked of Jesus confronted with a woman caught in adultery. It is a moving account, beautifully told, quite troubling in many aspects. This woman who had been caught in adultery was placed in front of Jesus. And this is brutal. She wasn't placed there as a person, but as an object with which to trap Jesus. And those who brought her to Jesus knew the law of Moses. They knew that according to that law, she was to be stoned to death. They thought that by bringing her to Jesus, they would trap him. But in reality, by bringing her to Jesus, they saved her life. Jesus sat on the ground, and he wrote on the ground. I think he was trying to take attention away from the humiliated woman standing there. And they continued to badger him, inviting him into their trap. And then he asked his question, "Let him who is without sin among you be the first to cast a stone." And they went away, leaving Jesus only. Of all those people, Jesus alone could have cast a stone. He was without sin. But he did not. Instead, he said to her, "Neither do I condemn you." What compassion, what a lovely, forgiving act. But it didn't end there. Note his final words to her: from now on, sin no more. She had sinned, and Jesus the merciful is also Jesus the judge, who doesn't condone or ignore sin. In the reading for today, Paul tells of the way he deals with the tension of having to share a gospel which was frequently rejected and ridiculed. And yet he says he doesn't tamper with God's word. He doesn't employ cunning. He doesn't try to dissemble. He openly states the truth. And he also talks about the gospel being veiled to people, veiled to those who are perishing, who are blinded by the God of the world. And this is deep and troubling language for us. The woman caught in adultery and the way Jesus acts presents a credible, attractive Jesus. But this account of Paul seems to be arrogant. It seems to be on the level of a conspiracy theory. Was Paul speaking in the name of the same Jesus who was with that woman that day? Some have said that the early church manipulated the words of Jesus, and there are many arguments against that, but the Gospels themselves contain mysterious and sometimes disturbing accounts. Think of the extent of the rejection Jesus faced in the account of the woman caught in adultery. Think of the transfiguration, the Gospel reading for today. What happened on that mountain? What happened was something that terrified even his 3 closest followers who had been with him for years. Jesus changed almost beyond recognition, and he was seen to be conversing with 2 long dead people from the Old Testament. The Transfiguration is troubling in its own different way. But if we give credence to the biblical account, we need to consider the aspects that we find palatable and the aspects that we don't. And this is reflected, I think, in the tensions that are implicit in faith. I think we know this. I think that for me, as I stand at a graveside, sprinkling earth into a grave and saying those words, as we worship and pray and reflect, I think we don't really expect the matters concerning love and justice and God and eternity to be any less complex than the lives we live and the matters of our physical existence. And we affirm this whenever we affirm our faith in God, because we affirm our faith in God who came among us but remained God, God who did wonderful things and worked miracles, who was opposed by humans and by spiritual forces. Our faith is in God who was killed by those who rejected him, but who rose from the grave. Our faith is in God who doesn't condone or ignore sin, but forgives it, who presents an alternative to sin's wages, an alternative which, along with Paul, we might see that many encounter and do not accept, but which continues to be made.